The room was cold. A quiet chill that didn't match the expensive furnishings or the shiny, polished wood of the lawyer's office. The silence stretched longer than necessary, the sound of a clock ticking somewhere distant enough to almost feel like an intrusion. I was staring at the stack of papers in front of me, trying to keep my hands steady. In the center of the table, an envelope sat, crisp, clean, and completely impersonal. That's how I felt. Impersonal. Like I didn't even belong here, even though the lawyer had assured me this was the next step. The next right step, he'd said. To the left of me sat my parents, side by side, their eyes fixed ahead like they were at some kind of social gathering, not the moment that could change everything. I glanced at their faces, their expressions guarded but strangely detached. It was hard to remember when they had become these strangers. These people who didn't care, who didn't even notice when things started to fall apart. Then the lawyer, a man I barely knew, started speaking. His voice echoed through the room as he opened the envelope with the same precision I'd seen him handle paperwork earlier. "Let's begin," he said, looking up. His glasses gleamed under the office light. "As per your late father's wishes, let me begin with the distribution of the estate." The words should have meant something. Should have carried weight. But all I could feel was the coldness of the room settling deeper into my chest. My heart pounded as I waited, knowing the next few moments would either confirm or shatter everything I had believed about my family. The lawyer read through a few names, some assets, nothing unexpected. And then came my name. "Madeline Carter," he said, his voice steady but somehow hollow. "You are entitled to $5. It felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I blinked, trying to process the absurdity of the words. $5? This wasn't a joke. It couldn't be. My parents didn't flinch. They didn't react. Nothing in their eyes showed they understood what had just happened. I felt the eyes of the lawyer on me, then my parents. A small, almost imperceptible nod from my father. My mother didn't even look at me. Her eyes were locked on the lawyer's papers, her fingers tightly clasped in front of her. The world shifted. I had expected something. I didn't know what. But certainly not this. Not $5. I could feel the heat rise in my chest, my body locking in place. It wasn't anger I felt at first. It wasn't even sadness. It was confusion. Were they serious? Were they really giving me this, a measly $5 check, after everything? I glanced at my parents. They didn't seem fazed. No tears. No regret. No hesitation. They just sat there like they had been given a perfectly acceptable answer to their own question. I swallowed hard. I don't even remember when I stood up. But somehow I was on my feet, my chair scraping against the polished floor. "Is there something wrong?" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. The air around me felt thick, suffocating. My mother sighed, looking up only for a moment, her face soft, pitying. "We talked about this, Madeline," she said. "Your sister needs this. Isabel's future, it's already set." She motioned to the stack of documents and the papers the lawyer was still shuffling through. "Your father and I, we made sure she'll have everything she needs." Her voice trailed off like she had said it all before. And maybe she had. "We can't afford the treatment, Madeline," my father added, not even looking at me. He was focused on something else somewhere far away. "We can't sacrifice Isabel's future for this. It's not how things are supposed to be." The silence that followed was suffocating. My throat tightened. My hands trembled slightly, but I kept them clenched by my sides. Not because I was angry. I wasn't angry yet. I was bewildered, stunned. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I couldn't find the words. I couldn't understand what I was hearing. They had made their choice. They had made it clear. Isabel, the shining star, the one who was always first, the one who always got everything. She would go to college, she would have a future. And I was left here, abandoned, without even a second thought. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of their indifference. The $5 check wasn't just an insult. It was a symbol of something deeper, a choice, a decision that I wasn't worth saving. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I could feel it deep within me, a fire igniting. I wasn't going to sit here. I wasn't going to die because they couldn't see me. They had written me off. They had chosen her. But I wasn't going to let them decide my fate. I walked out of the room without another word. The lawyer's voice was a blur behind me. The sound of my parents, quiet, dismissive, faded. I could hear the thumping of my own heartbeat in my ears as I walked down the hallway, not knowing where I was going, but knowing for the first time in years I was going somewhere. And it wasn't just a hospital room. It was the beginning of something far greater. Something they had no idea was coming. The drive home from the lawyer's office felt longer than it should have. The air in the car was thick, a constant hum of tension hanging between my parents and me. They hadn't said anything after I walked out of the lawyer's office, and I didn't say a word either. There was nothing left to say. We all knew what had just transpired. I looked out of the window, trying to focus on anything other than the cold weight of betrayal that settled deeper inside me. The city passed by in a blur of gray buildings and long stretches of empty streets. The world outside felt distant, like it was moving without me while I was stuck in this suffocating bubble. The silence in the car was deafening. I kept my eyes forward, but all I could think about were those words, "You're entitled to $5. My stomach churned every time they echoed in my mind. $5. Not even enough for a cup of coffee. Not enough for anything. I walked past them, leaving them standing in the hallway as their world fell apart. I didn't look back. The following weeks passed quietly, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was peaceful. A new kind of calm that I had never known before. Grandma's house felt like a sanctuary. It wasn't just the place I was healing, it was the place I was reborn. My body was healing, yes, but so was my heart. And my mind. I no longer carried the weight of resentment or anger. The fire inside me had burned bright, but now it was a steady glow, one that didn't consume me. I had set my plan into motion and I had executed it perfectly. They had faced the consequences, and it wasn't through my rage, it was through cold, calculated consequence. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't angry. I was something far more powerful. I was someone who had chosen to rise above the very people who had tried to break me. I was sitting in Grandma's cozy kitchen one evening, the soft aroma of tea filling the room, when I received a notification on my phone. It was an email. From a colleague at the mentorship conference. "Madeline, I just wanted to let you know that we've been hearing about your parents' situation. The news has spread and the reactions are, well, mixed. Some are shocked. Others are starting to ask questions. It's not easy to take down a giant, but it's happening. You were right to expose the truth." My fingers hovered over the screen as I read the message. It didn't surprise me though. I knew what I had done was working. The lies were finally being peeled back one layer at a time. My parents were being asked questions they couldn't answer. They were being scrutinized. Their precious reputation, the one they'd built on manipulation and deceit, was crumbling. I put my phone down, sipping my tea, and watched the sunlight fade as evening settled in. The warmth in the room felt comforting, like a soft blanket over my shoulders. But in the back of my mind there was something else, a sense of finality. My parents hadn't just lost their business. They had lost their image, their connections, and their social standing. Their friends, their colleagues had distanced themselves, some even privately reaching out to apologize for their involvement in supporting my parents. I had succeeded in exposing them, but not in a way that made me feel vindictive. I wasn't interested in revenge. I was interested in justice. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The final piece of the puzzle. A phone call from my lawyer, someone I'd had contact with during the investigation. He informed me that they had reached a settlement with my parents. My parents' firm was officially dissolved, their assets liquidated to cover the financial damages. But it didn't end there. There was more. A public statement was issued. It was short, matter-of-fact. Carter Academic Strategies was closed due to financial mismanagement and unethical practices. The words were clean, surgical, just like my approach. And that was it. That was the end of their empire. The perfect world they had created around themselves had disappeared. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was quiet. It was just the truth. I let the news wash over me, not with satisfaction, but with a sense of relief. The truth had won. My truth. But that wasn't the best part. The best part came weeks later when I walked into a local community center for a new mentorship program I had started. One where I helped young students who had come from broken families. The program was gaining momentum and I was finally building something of my own. As I walked into the room, the young faces turned to me, their eyes filled with hope and curiosity. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a shadow. I didn't feel invisible. I felt seen. And that was the moment when I knew everything had changed. Later that evening, I met Grandma for tea on the porch just like we had done for so many months. The stars were beginning to appear in the sky and the night was still. She smiled as she handed me a warm cup of tea. I didn't need to say anything. She already knew. "You did it, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice full of pride. I smiled, feeling the weight of her words settle into me like a warm hug. "I did," I said, my voice steady. "But it wasn't for them. It was for me." She nodded, her eyes twinkling with the same quiet wisdom she had always had. "And for the ones who see you for who you are." We sat there in silence, watching the world go by. The wind rustled through the trees and the night felt peaceful, like the calm after a storm. I wasn't looking for their apology anymore. I wasn't waiting for them to come back. I had grown beyond them, beyond their approval, beyond their lies. I had built something solid, something real, something that couldn't be taken away. And as I sipped my tea, the last words I whispered to myself were simple. They failed to see me. But I've always known who I am. Months passed, but I had never been more sure of one thing. I was done chasing my parents' love. I had done what I set out to do. Not out of anger, not for revenge, but because I had learned that I was worthy of a future. In the months that followed the collapse of their firm, things didn't get easier for my parents. They tried to recover, tried to rebuild, but it was never the same. Their reputation, once spotless, was now permanently tainted. They tried to change their... "Madeline," my father's voice broke through my thoughts, cold and distant. "We had no choice." "No choice?" "They had a choice. They chose her. Isabel. My perfect sister. The one who always came first. The one who was the star. Always." I could hear my father's voice in my head, proud as he bragged about Isabel's perfect grades, her ballet recitals, her bright future. I wasn't even a blip on their radar. Not until they needed something. "We need to talk about what happened," he continued, his eyes on the road, as if this conversation was as casual as any other. But I wasn't listening anymore. I knew this conversation. It was the same one we'd been having for years, the one where I was always the afterthought. The background. The burden. They hadn't really seen me, not truly, since I was a child. I had always been the one who faded into the background, the one who didn't quite live up to their expectations. Isabel was the golden child. The one who deserved everything. The one who never asked for anything and always got it. I remember being younger and hearing my parents talk about how Isabel was the one they invested in. She was the one who would go places, who would have a future. They always saw her as the investment, the child who mattered. I was just there. The one they could ignore. The one who always fell short of their perfect little world. And now, with a simple $5 check, it was confirmed. I didn't need to look at them to know they were still sitting there, probably waiting for me to cry, to beg for their attention. But I wouldn't. Not anymore. They had made their choice. They had decided. And I was done being the invisible one. I spent the rest of the drive in silence, staring out at the endless stretch of road, feeling my resolve grow stronger with each passing mile. I wouldn't let them define me. Not anymore. I would fight for my survival, and I would do it on my own terms. As we pulled into the driveway, I could already feel the coldness of the house waiting for me. It was the same house where I had grown up, the same house where I had always been overlooked. But now it felt different. It felt like a cage. I stepped out of the car, my legs moving on their own as I made my way inside. My mother was already inside, her back turned as she rearranged something in the kitchen. My father was at the table, flipping through paperwork, like nothing had happened. I stood there for a moment just watching them. They didn't even notice I was home. I wasn't sure what I expected from them. A gesture of apology? A sign that they regretted the choice they had made? Maybe part of me had hoped, but deep down I knew better. They were too wrapped up in their world, too invested in keeping up appearances. They had no idea what I was going through, or if they did, they didn't care. Isabel was their future. I was just an inconvenience. It wasn't the first time I had been overlooked, but it was the last time I would let it happen. That night, I sat in my room, the silence of the house pressing down on me. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their love. I had my own strength now. I wasn't going to waste it. I was going to use it to make sure they saw me. I would show them what they had thrown away, and I would do it without them even knowing I was coming. I pulled out my phone and started typing. Isabel's college tuition is more important than my life. The words felt cold as I typed them, but they were true. That's what they had chosen. But they hadn't chosen the consequences. They hadn't chosen the day they would realize the cost of their indifference. I paused before hitting send. This wasn't just a message. It was the start of something. The beginning of my revenge. The next few days felt like I was living in a fog, a constant, muted world where everything seemed distant, yet closer than ever before. I couldn't shake the images of my parents' indifferent faces. Their refusal to even glance back at me in the hospital room, their refusal to fight for my life. But somehow, it was that very betrayal that sparked something in me, a quiet, simmering fire that refused to die. As the days passed, I slipped back into a routine, pretending that everything was fine. But I was always watching, always calculating. I spent the first few days at home under the guise of healing, but my mind was already moving faster than my body could keep up. I couldn't rest. I couldn't wait for things to magically change. This wasn't some fairy tale where things turned around by the mere hope of it. This was real life. And in real life, the only way to get what you deserve is to take it. I started by revisiting the past, collecting pieces of the puzzle. Isabel's perfect life. My parents' fake smiles. I pulled out old photos from the family albums, flipping through them while the memories came flooding back. Every moment where I had been ignored, where I had been left behind, it was all there. But it wasn't just the photos. It was the lies. The first clue came when I found a series of bank statements from months before. I had to dig deep in the storage cabinet under old receipts and irrelevant paperwork. But when I found it, it hit me like a ton of bricks. They had been making large, unexplained withdrawals, all directed toward Isabel's college fund, but in an unusually suspicious way. There was a pattern to the transactions. And then I stumbled upon something worse. A set of wire transfers made under my parents' names that hadn't been properly recorded. At first I couldn't figure it out. It didn't make sense. But after spending hours piecing together these fragmented papers, I realized what they had been hiding: a network of deceit. They had been using Isabel's college fund as a cover for their own financial dealings, for the things they had been hiding from everyone. The sacrifices they had made were not for Isabel's future, they were for their own comfort. I sat back, the weight of it all settling in my chest. They hadn't just chosen Isabel's future over mine. They had been lying about it, manipulating not just me but everyone around them. And they thought no one would notice. But I was noticing. Every detail, every slip-up. I was quietly becoming the master of their world, and they had no idea. I spent the next few weeks combing through their financial records, pulling apart their facade piece by piece. I didn't need to know everything. I didn't need to care about all their lies. I just needed the key, the one thing that would tear it all down. That key was their connection to their perfect world, their reputation. And that's when I started looking into Eleanor Stratton. Eleanor Stratton was the director of the Stratton Scholars Network, a prestigious educational organization my parents had been bragging about for years. Isabel's name was always the first on the list at their dinners, their private events. She was the golden ticket, the one person my parents seemed to worship. She was the one who could make or break their future. I'd heard her name mentioned at every family gathering, her picture always framed and placed carefully in our living room, as if she were part of the family. But I never understood why my parents held her in such high regard. She wasn't family. She wasn't even a friend. She was a business contact. A connection to Isabel's success. That's when it hit me. If I wanted to make my parents feel what I felt, I needed to expose them to the people they cared about most. I needed to expose the truth. And Eleanor Stratton would be the perfect person to tell. I pulled out my phone and began drafting an email to Eleanor, keeping my tone neutral, matter-of-fact. I wasn't going to make a scene. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't even going to be angry. I was going to be cold, calculated, and methodical. Just like my parents had been. I typed the first few lines. Dear Miss Stratton, I hope this message finds you well. My name is Madeline Carter, and I am the daughter of Mark and Catherine Carter. You may be aware that my parents have been involved with your foundation for some time, particularly in regard to my sister Isabel's scholarship opportunities. I hesitated. I had no intention of begging for sympathy or trying to evoke any emotions. I wasn't here for a tear-jerking story. I was here to expose the truth, and that's exactly what I was going to do. I kept typing, my fingers moving faster now, fueled by a cold, calculated anger that had been building up for years. However, I wanted to inform you of something you may not be aware of. When I was in urgent need of medical treatment, my parents chose not to provide the funds necessary to save my life. They refused to pay for my treatment because the money was already allocated to my sister's college fund. The words were simple, direct, cold, just like they had been toward me. I survived because someone else, my grandmother, stepped in. I've attached the necessary documents for your reference, including proof of the denial of care and screenshots of communications confirming their decision. I thought you might want to know the kind of people you are endorsing. I read through it again. It felt right. It felt final. I wasn't going to scream at them. I wasn't going to make this public. This wasn't about embarrassing them in front of the world. This was about making sure they knew, in the quietest way possible, that their actions would have consequences. I hit send. It was days before I heard anything back from Eleanor Stratton. At first I wasn't surprised. I hadn't expected her to respond immediately. She was a busy woman, surrounded by elite circles and important people. I wasn't even sure she'd care. But I knew one thing for sure: she was the key. Then, 2 weeks after I had sent the email, something unexpected happened. I was sitting in the small, dimly lit living room of Grandma's house when my phone buzzed. I had almost forgotten about the email. But when I looked down, I saw the name in the inbox: Eleanor Stratton. I froze. My heart thudded against my ribs, but I didn't open the message immediately. I wanted to savor this moment, to feel the weight of it, because I knew something was about to change. Finally, I opened it. The email was short and to the point, and surprisingly, it was apologetic. Eleanor wasn't upset. She wasn't dismissive. She didn't brush me off like I thought she would. She was concerned. "Dear Madeline, thank you for bringing this to my attention. I have reviewed the documents you attached, and I am truly sorry for what you have gone through. It is unacceptable for any child to be left behind in such a manner. Please know that I will be looking into this situation and reconsidering any future partnerships with your family." I felt a sense of satisfaction. Calm, steady, controlled. This wasn't an emotional victory. It was exactly what I had planned. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The next few days things started to shift. Quietly, almost imperceptibly, but I could feel it. I checked the foundation's website. The logo that had once proudly featured my parents' name, Carter Academic Strategies, was no longer there. It was gone. The small badge that had been their crowning glory, the thing they bragged about to every potential client, every dinner guest, was wiped from the site without any explanation. At first I thought it might be a mistake, a glitch. But I knew better. I checked Eleanor's social media accounts. Her recent posts, the ones where she praised partnerships and collaborations, were suddenly lacking the usual mentions of my parents. The tags, the glowing comments about their achievements, the acknowledgement of their supposed contributions, it was all gone. In its place there were new stories. Stories about the foundation's commitment to transparency, integrity, and respect for all students. It didn't take long to figure out what had happened. Eleanor had cut them off. Quietly, carefully, without fanfare or announcement, but decisively. I watched this happen with a kind of cold detachment. There was no anger, no elation. Just calm. My parents had lost their golden ticket and they had no idea why. But I wasn't finished yet. I began to dig deeper, searching for more cracks in their perfect world. It didn't take long before I found something else. I discovered a few email chains between my parents and other influential figures in education. There were hints of favors being promised, donations made under the guise of scholarships, hidden deals, more manipulation. And then I found the letter. A letter that had been addressed to a private school my parents had been trying to get Isabel into. The letter was a glowing recommendation. A favor from someone in the academic world who had been bought with the promise of future donations. But there was something off about it. The date was wrong and the signature was inconsistent. It was clear my parents had been playing a game that wasn't above board. I printed everything. Every screenshot. Every email. Every piece of evidence. I needed to make sure the truth reached the right people. I had already exposed them to Eleanor, but this was bigger. This wasn't just about Eleanor Stratton. This was about everyone who had trusted my parents. Everyone who had been duped by their polished, perfect exterior. And I knew just the person to share it with. I sent the emails to a journalist I had researched, someone with a reputation for digging into the kind of stories people tried to keep quiet. I included all the evidence, neatly organized, with a single line at the end. "I think you'll find this interesting." It was simple, elegant, just the way I wanted it. No rage, no drama, just the cold, hard truth. I hit send. The days that followed felt strangely calm, as if the world had paused for just a moment, allowing everything to fall into place. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. There was no victory dance, no triumphant moment. Just a quiet satisfaction. The pieces of my plan were slowly coming together, and I knew the time was almost here. The journalist's article went live one chilly morning in late autumn. I was sitting in the guest room of Grandma's house, wrapped in a blanket, the world outside fading into gray as I scrolled through my phone. I didn't know when the article would be published, but I checked it anyway. I couldn't help myself. And there it was. The headline read, "Exposed: The Hidden Truth Behind Prominent Academic Consultancy Firm and the Price of Success." Below it, a subheading caught my eye. "An investigation reveals shocking financial misconduct and a culture of corruption in a well-known academic strategy firm." I clicked on the link, my heart thudding in my chest. There, in black and white, was everything. The transactions, the emails, the evidence I had meticulously gathered. The manipulation. The deceit. The empty promises made in exchange for favors. My parents' names were front and center. Their facade was crumbling in front of the very people they had worked so hard to impress. The article went on to detail their financial dealings, the way they had exploited Isabel's college fund, and how they had used their connections to secure donations and favors under the guise of scholarships. The letter that had been forged, the hidden transactions, the promises made, all of it was exposed in excruciating detail. I read through it, my pulse steady, my breathing calm. This was my revenge, not loud, not messy, but deliberate. The quiet execution of a plan so carefully crafted, so perfectly timed, that my parents didn't even know what hit them. I watched the reactions unfold. Within hours, people started talking. Clients who had worked with my parents began to pull out. Foundations distanced themselves. Schools started to rethink their partnerships. The phone calls and emails flooded in. My parents had built their empire on lies, and now those lies were being pulled apart piece by piece. But it didn't stop there. The next day, I received an email from Eleanor Stratton. The subject line simply read, "I think you should know." I opened it without hesitation. "Dear Madeline," she wrote, "I wanted to personally let you know that after reading the article, I have decided to cut all ties with your parents and their consulting firm. I believe in integrity above all else, and what I've learned about their practices is unacceptable. Your strength in sharing the truth is commendable." Her words felt like a victory, quiet and final. My parents were no longer in control of the narrative. The people they had relied on to maintain their perfect image had turned their backs on them. And there was nothing they could do to stop it. But I wasn't done yet. I began to get notifications from clients who had worked with my parents, people who had trusted them for years. Many of them had already pulled their business, but a few, still trying to distance themselves from the growing scandal, reached out to me. They wanted answers. They wanted to know how my parents had gotten away with it for so long. I didn't reply to them directly. Instead, I wrote another email, one that would send the message I wanted them to hear, the one that would leave them with no room for excuses. I sent it to every journalist and business contact who had ever been associated with my parents, with the subject, "The Real Story of the Carters and What They'd Been Hiding." It wasn't long before the story broke in the local news. My parents' firm was investigated, their assets frozen, and a formal inquiry was launched into their practices. They didn't just lose their business. They lost their reputation. Their precious image, so carefully built over years, was in tatters. And yet, I never said a word. I watched. I observed. I let them feel the weight of their choices without a single word from me. I was already done with them. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about the consequences they would have to face for what they did. Weeks passed and the fallout only deepened. Their consulting firm shut down. The offices were cleared out. Clients began to pull away. The final nail in the coffin came when 3 major contracts were terminated in a single week. My parents tried to salvage what little they could, but it was too late. Their empire had crumbled, and all that was left was the wreckage they had built on lies. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. The moment came when I saw my parents in person for the first time since everything had unfolded. It wasn't a grand confrontation. It wasn't a dramatic scene. It was a chance encounter at a youth mentorship conference. I had been invited to speak about resilience, about overcoming the odds. My parents, having fallen from grace, were there as well, attending a different panel. I had just finished my talk when I saw them. My mother looked different, older, worn out. Her makeup was smudged, her clothes out of place. My father's suit was too big, his shoulders slouched. They looked small, diminished. They saw me. "Madeline," my mother said, her voice shaky. "Please, just a minute." I folded my arms, standing still. My father spoke next, his voice soft, almost pleading. "We know we messed up." Their words were hollow. Empty. The image they had once projected of themselves, powerful, untouchable, was gone. "We've lost everything," my father continued, his voice trailing off. I looked at them. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel any satisfaction. I just felt calm. I had gotten what I needed. "You made a choice," I said, my voice flat, controlled. "And I'm just returning the favor." They flinched, their eyes downcast. There was no guilt in me, no rage. Just the cold, hard truth.